Hey y'all, my name is Joy. Welcome back to the channel. So I ran across this article online about the family that owns the convenience store that called the police on George Floyd. And we got to talk about it. We got to talk about it. Let's go through this now. So this article is on slate.com, and I'm going to try to remember to link it down in my descriptions. I always say that and then I always forget, but I'm going to remember this time. So I'm gonna pull the important stuff out, because if I read this whole thing, it would take like 30 minutes, and you just hear me reading, and I would feel like an English teacher, like we're back in like 11th grade and we're reading Huck Finn or something. But what I did do is highlight some of the key points from the story, and you're gonna get the full picture, and I want to talk about it. So I'm gonna go deep into. I'm not gonna go too deep. I'm not gonna go too deep into the background of this case, because we all know at this point what happened to our brother George Floyd. But I will briefly talk about it. So this article is about CUP Foods, Cup Foods, CUP Cup, it's one of the two. But it's the grocery store, the convenience store. I don't know if I can even call it a grocery store. Convenience store that George Floyd had just left after being accused of passing a fake $20 bill. So George Floyd is accused of going into this store, Cup Foods, on May 25th, earlier this year, and passing a fake $20 bill. Whether he knew it was fake or not, whether it was actually fake or not, I do not know. So he goes into the store, uses $20 bill to buy some stuff, leaves. As he's leaving, a employee says, hey, this bill is fake. Give me the stuff back. George leaves anyway, saying, I don't know what you're talking about. Goes to hang out in the parking lot. At this point, a 15-year-old employee calls the police, and we know how it evolves from there. The police arrest George Floyd in the parking lot, the Minneapolis police, and all assisted by Derek Chauvin. They murdered George Floyd. And Derek Chauvin is, of course, the cop that we see in the video with his knee on George Floyd's neck for 8 minutes, which ends up killing him. You can say he had COVID, he can do all these other things, but it is your knee on his neck which killed him. So this article starts by describing the store owner of Cup Foods, who everyone knows his nickname is Sam. So I'll start there. Quote, more than 30 years ago, Samir, this is Sam, Abumila, had a choice to make. Born in Palestine, he was the oldest son of a family that arrived to the United States when he was a child. The family moved to North Minneapolis to open a small convenience store. When Samir graduated high school in 1989, he could either go to college or start his own shop like his father, Hamadeh, had, and helped stabilize the finances for his parents and their 10 kids. He found an opportunity to lease a promising space on the other side of town. Put a pin in that. On the other side of town in South Minneapolis. The property had once been a drugstore and sat at the intersection of 4 neighborhoods. Samir went for it. He called his tiny corner store Chicago Unbeatable Prices, later shortened to CUP. I'm going to say Cup throughout this article. Over time, it expanded to include a deli, a cell phone repair shop, a notary public, and MoneyGram services. So before we continue with the article, let's take a look at the inside of this store. So this is what it looks like inside. And this is after the protest. I'll maybe try to find some photos before so we can get a couple up here. Now, Samir, the owner, is, if you didn't get it from that first paragraph, is Palestinian American, Arabic. If he had to check a race box in America, he'd probably have to check Asian. He'd probably check Asian to be the most accurate of how we do things. So Palestinian American, Arabic, Asian, Samir, and his family really owns this store. Now, of course, after the killing of George Floyd, the store was shut down. In fact, the whole intersection was shut down. In fact, damn near the whole city of Minneapolis was shut down. And don't take that as a dig. The city should have been shut down. They need to shut this whole country down until we figure this shit out. And by figure this shit out, I'll go on beyond that. But I won't digress. Because we're focused on this article right now, and I can... many more videos in the past, I've talked about exactly what we need to fix, and I'll talk about it a little bit more. Article continues. On June 15th, Mahmoud, who is one of Samir's brothers, Sam, and they own the store together, family enterprise. So Mahmoud and his brothers tried to open the store back up. That didn't last long. Many protesters who were holding the area down, including residents and activists from Chicago, viewed the reopening as an insult to Floyd's memory and their cause. Now remember, I said Floyd was killed on May 25th, so June 15th, maybe less than 3 weeks. And we know now, past this summer, we're in September, October now, we know what happened after George Floyd's murder. So the fact that they tried to open the store within 21 days of him being killed, someone else put a pin in that. Remember that. People who were organizing around the store told the owners it wasn't safe to open. According to Mahmoud, they told the brothers, guys, there's too much animosity, there's too much pressure, it's not safe, and they promptly closed back down. I don't know if I like the language there, saying it's not safe, it's not appropriate. You have a man who was brutally murdered by the police that has sparked international protest. A long legacy that has contributed to this 400 years, and you think, yeah, I'll just open back up. That's what's wrong with this country right now. Article continues. Among those who warned the brothers to keep the store closed was a group called the Agape Movement, co-founded by a former gang member who appointed themselves to keep the intersection safe. It was called 30 in Chicago. The name refers to a theological term for Christian love. When I was there, several of them were armed. This is speaking from the guy who wrote the article. Talk about him later. I spoke with one of the Agape leaders, Steve Floyd, who said he was a distant relative of George's. Quote, we're from the same plantation, he told me. Quote, we're from the same plantation, he told me. Some people, Floyd described them as an angry group. Floyd described them as an angry group separate from the main protesters. We're ready to bomb that store and burn it up, he said. He'd lived in the neighborhood some 40 years, a decade longer than Cup Foods had been there. So Steve Floyd says he's some kin to George Floyd, is saying don't open up. It's going to get burned down. Steve Floyd doesn't blame Cup Foods directly for George's killing, but he wouldn't call the store's owners blameless. Quote, they did what people typically don't do, pointing somebody out for something you don't even get arrested for, he said, referring to the neighborhood reluctance to call the police for non-violent crimes. I mean, that's right. I mean, I don't live in Chicago, but I'm thinking like maybe if my car gets broken into, which is a non-violent crime, and I'm like in somewhere, I might call the police just so I can have a police report. And if it's, worth it, I claim insurance, but it's always good to have a police report for things like that. But as far as like calling the police on violent crimes, that makes sense to me if it's happening in your store and endangering people and customers around you. And so I can understand how this makes sense. Another local, continuing here, Carmen Means, who is executive director of a Minneapolis urban development group, told me that she believed the store should close right now because of the role they played. And to be clear, they did not kill George Floyd, but they did play a meaningful role in the lynching of George Floyd. That speaks to the culture of the store, she told me. Quote, my personal experience inside the store, I didn't have any issues. I won't lie and say that I did. End quote, she said. The challenge, she said, is what the store represents. Of course, as I alluded to earlier, it represents much more than an alleged fake $20 bill. Over the past few months, the brothers have made several attempts to repair their relationship with the community, which are also attempts to save their business. Of course, if they weren't trying to repair their relationship and have a if they weren't trying to repair their reputation and have a relationship with the community, then of course it's in an effort to save their business. In the immediate aftermath of Floyd's killing, they publicly offered to pay for the funeral and announced that they were going to be significant policy changes on the subject of when employees should call the police, only in cases of violence. Mahmoud told me he has met privately with different members of Floyd's family. He said the meetings included Floyd's children's mother, his brothers, cousins, and so on. The conversation was pleasant. Goes on to say the brothers also hired Jamar Nelson, a childhood friend, to work as a public relations liaison. Nelson told me he believes Cup Foods has been unfairly vilified. You can get angry at the Beckys or the Karens of the world because those are malicious, spiteful calls to police, he said. This was not that. This is a business that takes extreme caution with calling the police. Period. They got raided for not calling the cops. This is a community store, he told me. The generic Arab store owner has become a cliche in many black neighborhoods. This is coming from the author, not my quote. In my experience, interactions at stores like this tend to be short, and bulletproof glass between clerks and customers creates a barrier both real and psychic. Excuse me, this is coming from Jamar's perspective. I've heard customers call Arab clerks Ak. Actually, it's not clear whose perspective this is. But I'll go on. I've heard customers call Arab clerks Ak, an affectionate term short for Aki, the Arabic word for brother. But Arab clerks are often viewed as racist or at the very least hostile toward the black communities they serve. Well, every race has their coons. There's nothing. Of course, there's black people who are inviting everybody to the cookout. Goes on. I have seen the hostility myself growing up in Newark, New Jersey, a majority black city where many corner stores are operated by Arabs. That's not what it looks like at Cup. The store has photos of generations of customers on the wall, but I asked Mahmoud if he recognized that dynamic. He knew what I was getting at. He said, quote, a lot of Arabs are racist, and it shows. They go in black communities and open stores, and they don't respect the community, he said. But, he insisted, that's the opposite of us. I have confidence in our community. We're going to open, inshallah. It's just a matter of time. Nelson, this is the guy they ordered. Did they order him? The guy they hired to be the public relations liaison, childhood friend. Nelson also rejected the idea that his dynamic might have played a part in Floyd's death. It's hard for me to say that someone brown is racist, especially immigrants that come from war-torn countries. Because they battle white folks, they know the white man exerts power. It's a prejudice more than racism. Because prejudice comes from ignorance, a brown man who knows what being oppressed means, come on, I can't call that person racist. So Jamar Nelson, this is him speaking. He's talking, I guess he grew up. Where does he say he grew up? This is from his perspective. I got it clear now. And he grew up, Newark, New Jersey. Very diverse. Most of the Northeast is. He is saying it's absolutely crazy. This black man's perspective. I assume Jamar Nelson, he's African American and not immigrant from Africa or the Middle East, Arabic, Muslim. He might be, but I'm just saying as far as his ethnicity and nationality. He is saying that it's crazy to assume that a brown person could be racist, when we absolutely know that white and black and brown is something that we maybe invented in the last 40 years because folks didn't want to be brown, and we need, because folks didn't want to be black. And so now we have white, black, and brown instead of white and black. Either way, we know in America it's just not about skin color. When we talk about whiteness and who can be racist and who isn't racist, and who's white and isn't white. It's about who's allowed to assume whiteness, not the skin color. It's allowed who call themselves white. Irish, Italian, most Eastern Europeans, most Southern Europeans had to assimilate into whiteness. It was like the Brits, maybe the French, and the Scottish who got to come to America as white from jump. Everybody else had to become white. So it's about who's allowed to access white spaces, who gets to own resources. That is what white is in America. Brown people can be racist when they exert power and privilege, which they are allowed to assume because they have not been situated as a bottom caste in America, like AWS, African Americans, black people have, African Americans in particular. Article continues. After more than 2 months, mostly dark, Cup Foods finally reopened on August 3rd to a very different neighborhood. Protesters tried to force it to close again, barricading the entrance with large trash receptacles. But this time, the Amabayalas decided to forge ahead. The business is now bringing in around 70% of the revenue it did before Floyd's killing. So Floyd was killed in May, kind of beginning of the pandemic. I say, I mean, when I read this, I was like, that's pretty damn good for the current pandemic, bringing in 70% of businesses. How many black businesses y'all know getting 70% of their post or pre-pandemic, pre uh, protest revenue right now? How many black businesses do you even know? And I'm not saying it's because it's out of ignorance. I'm saying it's because we get the least amount of loans, the least amount of capital, the least amount of resources. Toussaint Morrison, a Black Lives Matter organizer in Minneapolis, said he doesn't actually see any problem with Cup Foods reopening, but he doesn't necessarily think anyone should shop there. I'm going to have to agree. You know, it's everybody's right to open a store, but I definitely wouldn't shop there, nor should anyone with any respectability, morality, any sense of what happened inside and outside of that store on May 25th. We met in a local coffee shop a short drive away from George Floyd Square, which is what they're calling the area outside of the store that's been shut down, the intersection. Quote, the first black-owned bookstore just opened. That shows you how far behind Minneapolis is, end quote, he told me. Morrison envisioned turning the corner of 38th and Chicago into a new Black Wall Street where black residents can get special business loans so black Americans can be the ones earning family wealth in their own communities. Quote, people are ready to ride for 38th and George Floyd, and people will fight for it, he said. But the people have to vote with their dollars, and in the black community, we're not used to that because historically, brackets here, the ability to do that has been stripped away from us. End quote. On Cup Foods reopening, he said, I say get a black-owned corner store near there and say shop here. We'll beat all of their prices, even if we lose money, whatever, end quote. The point is, he said, is to keep black money in the black community. Whether they open it or not, it's on us as a community to not buy their shit. It's that simple. I can't agree more. Now, some of his points don't sound like good economics. Now, you can't just lose money and expect us to survive. That makes no sense. But I would want to see, there's no reason that this family, who is not a black family, who is not from the community, needs to reopen in that spot. Not when the article has already told me that they have 15 other properties. In fact, they should have never been able to open up a store in that neighborhood in the first place. The same way we don't want police who come from outside the community. And the same way we don't want and can't elect officials who don't come from the community. I can't elect somebody who lives in Florida to be a city council member in Louisiana just because they're interested in the city. It's not how it works. If you're supposed to be a public servant, provide service, maybe let's not even say you're a public servant or you work for the government, but if you're providing a service, don't you think you should have some investment in that community? An investment that's beyond how much money you can make? It was pointed out in this article in the beginning that the store owner lived across Chicago in a whole different neighborhood. Remember that. So why would you invest in, you live in community A, work in community B. Why would you put more of your time and energy into community B when your family, your house is in community A? You wouldn't. So I want to ask directly, beyond property taxes, we all pay property taxes, we all pay sales taxes. So I don't see that as anything to sing about. But I want to know, how has this family directly invested in the schools in the neighborhood? How have they directly given back to the community? I mean, look at the inside of this store. Seriously. No roof. There's barely any drywall up. There. But no, for real, this says nothing about the people who are in the neighborhood, but everything about how this family, how the owners, and how the brothers feel about the black people that frequent their store. Because that's who frequents their store. You got to tell me, have you ever been able to walk into a Macy's and you can see the air ducts and the electrical wiring and the drywall? And the worst part about it is that we have to depend on these type of stores. Because we don't get the loans, we don't get the capital, we don't get the resources. We haven't been repaired in the way that we should have after 400 years of oppression. The food is bad. The store is bad. But this is what we get. There are no Safeways coming to 38th in Chicago. Do y'all see any Trader Joe's buying for these lots in these predominantly black neighborhoods? Even then, I say that, but my first hope is that we get to open our own stores in our own neighborhoods after we made a bottom cast for 400 years. I've talked about it before. The only way to climb out of this situation is through reparations, but I digress because that's not what this video is about. Then we build our own infrastructure in our own communities, and we get to be self-interested just like every other ethnic group. Not selfish, self-interested. Not xenophobic, self-interested. One of the points this article tries to highlight over and over again is the idea that the teen who called George Floyd didn't know any better. And I talk about it a lot, but the teen, I think they say he's 15, tall, black, West African kid who just come over. Born in America, oddly enough, but grew up in West Africa. Say he didn't really understand the dynamic between black people and the police. I want to make it clear, I'm not going to blame you. You're not going to catch me blaming this teenager for any of this, because how do you fault a 15-year-old teen who should not be working? I remember when I was a teenager in Louisiana, where they have you driving as long as you live on a farm and you're at least 10 years old, but you had to be at least 16. So it seems like he shouldn't have been tasked with doing this in the first place. But beyond that, I was in the military, and I know even in the military, I learned more about the places that we were going to deploy to in the Middle East, North Africa, learn more about Arabic culture, Muslim culture, the Quran, than I ever did in the military about America. And we weren't going to live there for the rest of our lives. Supposed to hop in and out. But even then, we were forced to learn the customs. Now you're telling me you were born here, going to live here for the rest of your life, and your family doesn't teach you how to survive and what's going on here? That this store has been owned by family friends, and teenagers have been working at this store, your friends and family, for 30 years, but nobody knew. I don't believe it. The owners of this store knew. The article mentions that they had a quota of calls they had to make to the police. This store had been known to be a hotspot for drugs, both dealing in and out over the course of these 30 years. So over the 10, 15 years ago, the police said, okay, if you're not making at least 10 calls to us a week, you're getting fined. Now, I'm supposed to magically believe that when the police have this relationship with the owners of the store, and they can say that we're not going to renew your licenses, you're not going to be able to sell food, we're going to fine you if you don't make calls to us. I'm supposed to believe that magically that's just not the case anymore. When I know that the employees were familiar with George Floyd, he came in and said hey to everybody. They knew who he was. When I know that George knew who Derek Chauvin was, the man who had his knee on his neck, and I know that Derek Chauvin knew him, according to all the evidence. But I'm supposed to believe that magically the owners didn't want to call the police. To one of their 15 properties, by the way. So even if this store never opened again, I'm having a hard time feeling sorry when they own 15 other properties. What is losing this store that is connected to this brutal murder that your establishment had a direct relationship with you've also had this transactional relationship with the police where they give you something, you give them something. I'm supposed to feel sorry and want this store, one of their 15 properties, to reopen. Why? It can reopen, but it don't need to reopen as Cup Foods, owned by this family. And if we know all this is true, that this family has 15 properties, it's a drug hotspot, they have underage workers in the establishment, it's run down, dirty, nasty. You got to ask yourself, what's the point of the article to begin off with? Because it's not to honor George Floyd. Well, look at the author of the article. And ask yourself, why might he write a fluff piece trying to convince America, trying to convince Black America, ADOS folks especially, who live in that neighborhood, that these brothers who own the store are somehow the victims in all of this? Why is the author trying to convince us of that? Well, I say again, self-interest. The author, Amon Ismail is his name. His Twitter bio says that he is an American Muslim with more questions than answers. Another article I pulled from Columbia's Journalism Review website says that he is an Egyptian American journalist. Now, I believe everyone is allowed to be self-interested. I'll say that over and over again. And that's what I'm trying to get my people to be self-interested instead of giving away our vote. And if you look at Ismail's bylines, he is singularly focused. He is singularly self-interested on the Muslim experience and how he can do better for his people. How can I use my platform to help Muslims in America? And again, I have no problem with that. Just don't piss on me and tell me it's raining. Don't tell me that I'm xenophobic and I can't have self-interest in my own group. I can't want justice for George Floyd. I can't want that store to never reopen again. I can't want a Black business to move into that location when everyone else gets to have that. When we can have all these violations of this store over 30 years, but we still get a piece wanting us to feel sympathetic about its reopening. I can understand self-interest, but I don't have to agree with it to the detriment of my own people. Go through if you don't believe me. Read the whole article. Where is the sympathy for George Floyd? If they really cared about, if the brothers of this, Samir, Mumad, Mike, really cared about George Floyd and his family, they're doing all these meetings, hiring a public relations liaison, then do something else with the property. Sell it. I don't believe that they didn't know what was going to happen to George Floyd when they called the police. I don't believe that they have put any investments in this community that's worthwhile, that's worth me demanding or taking any of my time to ensure that that store stays open. But that's what I got, folks. Let me know what you think. Go read the article. I'm going to link it. Tell me, should Cup Foods reopen? Am I reading too much? Tell me what you think. Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave that comment. And I'll talk to you next time. Bye.